President Donald Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Saudi Arabia today, much to the chagrin of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who very much wants to be part of peace negotiations in order to end the ongoing war in Ukraine. Now, I'm gonna get to what Trump and Putin are allegedly working toward outside of a potential peace agreement with Ukraine. But before I get to that, I do think it's important to really hyper focus on some of what Donald Trump had to say, which really does have Volodymyr Zelensky furious with the Trump administration, feeling alienated and abandoned by America. Our European allies are also very much concerned about some of these statements. But apparently Trump said or implied that the war is partly Ukraine's fault. He said this, and I'm quoting verbatim, "You should have never started it," Trump said of Ukraine while criticizing President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had expressed concern that his country was not included in talks between the United States and Russia in Saudi Arabia. Trump continues by saying, "I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited," essentially referring to Volodymyr Zelensky. And then he continues, "Well, you've been there for 3 years," Trump told reporters at Mar-a-Lago. "You should have never started it. You could have made a deal." Trump also went on to argue that he could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land that's now essentially, at the heart of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And he continues to say everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down, but they chose not to do it that way. Now, if you can recall, early on in this war, which began in February of 2022, the then Prime Minister of UK, Boris Johnson, had met with Volodymyr Zelensky, essentially discouraging him from engaging in peace talks. And the reason for that is that the West wanted to essentially have Russia expend their military capability, essentially bleed out their military capability through the course of this war. But there has been a price to pay for Ukrainians, of course, in having this war drag on. And in the beginning, Vladimir Putin was under the assumption that this was an easy war to win. It was not easy. In the very beginning, he was having a lot of difficulty. His military was having a lot of difficulty. And so he was in more of a position to agree to peace talks back then. But as the war kind of heated up and Russia was able to secure more and more territory in Ukraine, he was less incentivized to engage in peace negotiations. Now Donald Trump is involved, and it's clear to me that there are certain business negotiations taking place, and I'll give you some more details on that in just a moment, Cenk. But first, I wanted to get your thoughts on what he had to say about Ukraine partly being responsible for this war.
Yeah, so that's enormously unfair. The people responsible for a war, the people who started, and so and continued it, and are more powerful and taking land, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, there's no question the Russians started it. We've been over this 100 times on the Young Turks. Did Biden and the US make mistakes that partially led up to the war? I think they did. I think talking about Ukraine being in NATO further antagonized Russia, et cetera. But at the end, they said that they wouldn't be in NATO and Russia attacked anyway. So not helpful. In the beginning, when Trump first took office, I was slightly encouraged, Anna, because he didn't immediately give away the whole deal to the Russians, and it looked like he was actually going to negotiate, and he was going to even threaten them a little bit. So I'm not in the camp of don't talk to Putin by yourself and exclude the Russians. I'm saying the Ukrainians and the Europeans. I don't really care how peace talks start as long as they talk. So there's also some encouraging things because that has begun, and they come out saying that they're more likely to reach an agreement. But part of the reason they're more likely to reach an agreement is because that initial, credit to Trump for seeming a little bit more unbiased is now quickly dissipating as he's going around, him and his administration, saying basically Russia was right about everything. That's not at all helpful to the negotiations. So, and now I'm very worried about the Ukrainians.
Yeah, so all of this is kind of coming into focus for me. And so I'm going to take a step back and give you all the broader picture in just a minute. But in regard to the conversations between Donald Trump and Putin in Saudi Arabia, they actually didn't focus the majority of their talks on ending the war in Ukraine. Obviously, that was one of the topics, but it was essentially a way of opening up diplomatic avenues in which additional negotiations and talks centered on a peace deal will take place. So in an interview with the Associated Press after the meeting, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the two sides agreed broadly to pursue three specific goals. That includes restoring staffing at their respective embassies in Washington and Moscow, of course, to create a high-level team to support Ukraine peace talks and to explore closer relations, and this is important, economic cooperation. So look, if you're super Trump deranged, you're immediately going to think about Trump's personal business deals. But I actually think this is more about what his policy goals are in regard to the economy. So earlier this month, I had done a story about how one of Donald Trump's avenues to lower inflation was to encourage Saudi Arabia to increase their oil production. If there's more oil supply, the idea is that's going to bring oil prices down. That's going to translate to lower prices when it comes to goods and services because of, transport and all of that. But Saudi Arabia is like, nah, bro, we're not going to do that because the more oil they produce, the cheaper oil is, the more their economy suffers. Now, let's not forget that the ongoing war in Ukraine has had an impact on inflation. Ukraine is known as the, bread bowl of the world. And so when that war started, that's when inflation really started to tick up. And in addition to that, remember, because of the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States slapped some pretty significant sanctions against Russia. I think that Donald Trump is now seeing Russia as a potential player in his efforts in lowering inflation. Essentially, remove the sanctions after there's a peace deal at play, have them produce oil. Once you get rid of those sanctions, that oil is more available on the economic global market. And I think that's what this is really about. I think he is seeing Russia as a tool to lower inflation. So people stop bugging him about the fact that he didn't lower inflation on day one, which was a ridiculous promise to make. That's my read of it. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good take on it and accurate. And remember, one of his giant campaign promises was drill baby drill is going to lead to lower prices. Now he's authorized drill baby drill to no end, and it doesn't really matter because Obama and Biden had broken records on how much they allowed drilling anyway. So it's not like he had that much to add. But that was never going to work, and we've always said that it was never going to work. It's certainly not related to the price of eggs, and it's not even related to the price of oil in the world market because we're only one country. Aha! But when you involve Saudi Arabia, the Russians, and all of OPEC, then you can affect the worldwide oil market and bring down gas prices, and then pretend that your drill baby drill policy is what led to it. Open up more federal land for your donors to ravage and then not give anything back to the American people on, et cetera, et cetera. So it checks off a lot of boxes for him. And the only downside is he has to probably throw Ukraine under the bus, which I don't think he cares about it at all.
I agree, actually, about that. I don't think he cares all that much about Ukraine. I think, look, fact of the matter is Ukraine doesn't really have much leverage. So Volodymyr Zelensky is furious. He's furious for good reason. He feels that he's been kind of blocked out of peace negotiations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio argues that is not the case. We're just having initial conversations to reestablish diplomatic ties with Russia. And of course, at the end of the day, Ukraine will be involved in peace negotiations. But nonetheless, unfortunately for Zelensky and Ukraine, they really do need US military support in order to continue with the war. So this is going to pressure Zelensky to come to the table, number one, but also it's going to probably pressure Zelensky to accept a deal that he doesn't like. That's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong about that. But considering which players in this whole equation have the leverage, I think Ukraine is probably going to end up accepting a deal they don't like.
Yeah, let me just give last word to a couple of our members on Twitch. So Yayboy07 said, Ukraine is 0.00% responsible for this war. I largely agree with that. If anyone was responsible outside of Russia, I'd put it on more of the Western nations that pushed forward, including the US. And I don't know why Biden seemed to signal that a minor incursion would be okay. That was, and it literally might have been that he has dementia. And so I think there's a tiny bit of responsibility. I don't know about even know about tiny bit, but some responsibility on the West and America in general. But Ukraine has been the victim throughout in all of this.
Right.
And No Math Dragon doubled down on their earlier suggestion, which I really liked when we were discussing this about a week ago. Give Ukraine their nukes, at least as a bargaining chip, but that isn't Trump's plan. So if you really wanted to do the right thing here, not just for the Ukrainians, but for us, for everyone involved, and especially for peace, you would negotiate as hard as possible right now with the Russians, and you'd ask for as good a deal as you can get for the Ukrainians and for us, right? And maybe that deal, not maybe, certainly that deal would not be perfect. And there's a lot that the Ukrainians would really hate about that deal because it would involve a compromise involving land. And that's so fundamentally unfair to the Ukrainians. But that's what a peace negotiation would look like. That's why I like that member's comment and suggestion, because I wouldn't want Ukraine to get their nukes back, but I would want to use it as leverage because it's a rare thing that can create leverage. Now, without that kind of leverage, it looks like Trump is giving away the store. I don't know that he even wanted the leverage, to be honest, but he's back to, okay, something for us, something for the Russians, Ukrainians and Europe, not so much.
Yeah, and look, I'll end on this. The way this is playing out for Ukraine really does discourage other nuclear powers from denuclearizing, which Donald Trump claims is one of his policy goals. He claims that he wants to get other countries to, including the United States, by the way, to denuclearize. Now, whether you believe him on wanting to accomplish that goal or not is beside the point. Let's just assume, for the sake of this conversation, that he's serious about it, that he's sincere about it. Any country who goes along with a US deal to denuclearize would be crazy considering what has just happened with Ukraine. So we'll see how this all plays out, but obviously we're staying on the story. We'll give you more details as it develops, but that's what we've got for now.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.